If the monster remembers your touch, it means he was never truly gone. The chains rattled before she ever saw him, a deep metallic echo rolling through the stone tower like a warning the walls themselves were trying to whisper, and Elena Whitmore paused just inside the threshold, her fingers tightening around the thin wool of her cloak as the heavy doors slammed shut behind her with a final, suffocating thud, sealing her inside with the cursed king everyone else had already given up on. The air thick and warm in a way that didn't belong in a place built from cold, gray stone, carrying a faint scent of ash and something wilder beneath it, something alive, something watching, and she felt it before she saw him. That presence, heavy, coiled, waiting, like standing too close to a storm that hadn't decided whether to break, her breath catching as her eyes adjusted to the dim torchlight flickering along the walls, revealing the massive shape at the center of the chamber, restrained but not contained, his silhouette shifting subtly with each slow inhale, as though the darkness itself bent around him, and every story she'd heard tried to rise up inside her at once. The ones about the king who had once united entire territories with a single command, the warrior who had never lost a battle, the man who had become something else entirely after the curse took hold. But none of those stories prepared her for this moment, for the quiet, for the stillness, for the way the air seemed to hum with something unspoken, and she realized with a strange clarity that he wasn't raging, he wasn't attacking, he was listening, waiting to see what she would do, just like every other Omega they had sent before her. Except they had all broken within minutes. She'd been told, tears, pleas, panic, but Elena didn't move, didn't speak. Because something deeper than fear rooted her in place, something that whispered that if she ran, if she showed even a flicker of terror, whatever remained of the man inside that beast would retreat even further into the shadows. And then it would truly be over. So instead, she took a slow step forward, the sound of her boots against stone impossibly loud in the silence, and the chains responded with a low, deliberate shift, not violent, not aggressive, just enough to remind her that he was aware, that he was measuring her just as she was measuring him, and her heart pounded hard enough she could feel it in her throat, but her voice, when it came, was steady, softer than the crackling torches. "I'm not here to hurt you." The words barely more than a breath, but they lingered in the space between them, fragile and bold all at once, and for a moment, nothing happened, no movement, no reaction. Just that same charged stillness pressing in from every side, until slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shape in the darkness shifted again, not toward her, not away, but closer to something she couldn't yet name, and Elena swallowed, her pulse racing as she took another step, then another, drawn forward not by courage exactly, but by something quieter, something that felt like recognition, as if the distance between them wasn't just physical but something older, something waiting to be bridged. And when she finally saw his eyes, catching the faint light with an unnatural intensity, she didn't see a monster ready to strike. She saw something trapped, something tired, something that hadn't been seen as human in a very long time. And instead of stepping back, she stepped closer. The silence did not break. It deepened, stretching between them until it felt almost tangible, and Elena could hear the faint rhythm of her own breathing echoing back at her from the stone walls, as if the tower itself was listening, waiting to see whether she would retreat like the others or take one step too far. And she felt that instinct rising inside her, the same instinct that told prey to run, to survive, to escape before something stronger decided it was done waiting, but she did not move back, because those eyes were still on her, steady, unblinking, not lunging, not snapping, simply watching, and there was something in that gaze that did not match the stories, something that did not belong to a mindless creature, something aware, something holding on, and her chest tightened with a quiet realization that frightened her more than anything else, because if he was still in there, even a little, then this was not just a curse, it was a prison, and she was standing at the threshold of it, invited or not, and the thought grounded her more than fear ever could, her hand lifting slowly, carefully, not reaching all the way, just enough to show intention, to show she was not hiding anything, not carrying harm, her fingers trembling just slightly in the warm air as she took another step closer, the distance between them shrinking to less than 10 feet. Now, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, unnatural and steady like a furnace that had been burning far too long, and she swallowed as that warmth brushed against her skin, not painful, not dangerous, just intense, overwhelming in its presence, and she realized that he had not moved to stop her, not even when she crossed what felt like an invisible boundary, the place where anyone else would have turned and fled. And still he watched, and something in her voice softened. Further when she spoke again, quieter, steadier. "They told me you cannot hear anyone anymore," she said, the words almost lost in the space between them. "But I do not believe that." And for a moment she thought she imagined it, the smallest shift in his posture, not forward, not aggressive, but something like tension easing, just a fraction, just enough to make her breath catch, because it meant he understood, or at least some part of him did. And she felt it then, not with her eyes but with something deeper, that quiet pull she had never been able to explain, the same one that had always allowed her to sense when someone was hurting even when they tried to hide it. Only this time it was louder, heavier, pressing against her like a tide, filled with confusion, exhaustion, and something dangerously close to anger that was not aimed at her, but at the cage he had been forced into. And it made her chest ache as if the feeling was her own, and she did not think about it. She simply followed that instinct, stepping closer until the space between them felt charged with something unspoken, her hand lifting higher now, hovering just inches from the chains that bound him, not touching, not yet, giving him the chance to pull away if he wanted, if he could, but he did not. And that was when she understood that this was not about strength or dominance or fear. It was about trust, fragile and impossible in a place like this, and somehow resting in her hands. And her voice dropped to a whisper, softer than before, steady despite the storm inside her chest. "You are still here," she said, not as a question but as a promise. And for the first time, the air shifted, not violently, not sharply, but with a quiet, undeniable change, as if something inside the darkness had just begun to listen. The space between them narrowed to something fragile and electric, and Elena could feel it in the way her breath slowed without her permission, as if her body understood before her mind did that this moment mattered, that whatever happened next would not be undone. And still he did not move away, the chains resting against his form with a quiet tension that no longer felt like a threat, but like a boundary he could not cross even if he wanted to. And that thought settled into her chest with a weight she could not ignore, because it meant he was choosing this stillness, choosing not to lash out, choosing to remain where he was despite everything that must have been raging beneath the surface. And her hand trembled slightly as it hovered closer, inches now from the cold metal that separated them, her fingers brushing the air just above it as warmth radiated outward, stronger here, almost pulsing, like a heartbeat that did not belong to her. And she closed her eyes for a brief second, letting that sensation move through her, not resisting it, not questioning it, just feeling, the way she always had when someone carried pain too heavy to hold alone. Except this was different, deeper, layered with something ancient and fractured and unbearably tired, and it pressed against her senses until her chest tightened, her breath catching as if she had stepped into his burden without meaning to, and she understood then, not with logic but with instinct, that the curse was not just something placed on him. It was something that fed on what remained of him, something that twisted and pulled and refused to let go. And the realization steadied her in a way fear never could, because it gave her something to hold on to, something to reach for beyond the darkness. And when she opened her eyes again, she did not hesitate, her fingers finally closing the last inch of distance, resting lightly against the chain between them, the metal cool beneath her touch, grounding, real, and for a moment nothing happened, the world holding its breath around them, until the reaction came not from the chain but from him, a subtle shift, a tightening that was not aggression but awareness, as if the contact had reached somewhere deeper than the surface. And Elena felt it immediately, a surge of something unfamiliar yet unmistakable, not pain, not anger, but recognition, faint and flickering like a distant memory struggling to return. And her heart stuttered in her chest as she leaned slightly closer without thinking, drawn by that fragile response, her voice softer now, almost reverent. "You feel that, do not you?" she whispered, not expecting an answer, not needing one, because the air itself seemed to respond, the warmth intensifying for just a moment before settling again, steadier this time, less chaotic, and it sent a quiet wave of relief through her that she had not expected, because it meant she was not imagining it. She was not alone in this moment, and slowly, carefully, she moved her hand from the chain to his skin, just the lightest contact at first, her fingertips, barely brushing against him, testing, waiting, giving him every chance to pull away, to reject the contact, to prove that the monster everyone feared was still in control, but he did not. And that stillness broke something open inside her, a quiet certainty replacing the fear she had carried into this tower, and she exhaled softly, her touch becoming more deliberate now, steady, grounded, as she let that same warmth she had always carried begin to move outward, not forced, not commanded, just offered, the way it always had been, a quiet gift she never understood but never questioned. And the moment it flowed into him, she felt the difference, the tension shifting, the chaos beneath the surface, pulling back just slightly, as if something inside him had finally found a place to rest, and her eyes lifted to meet his again, searching, steady, and for the first time since she had entered the tower, she saw it clearly, not the shadow, not the curse, but the man beneath it, flickering through for just a second before the darkness closed in again, and her breath caught, not in fear, but in hope, because now she knew, without doubt, that he was still there, waiting. The moment her touch settled against him, something shifted in the air that could not be explained, not seen, not heard, but felt. A quiet unraveling of tension that had been coiled for far too long, and Elena held her breath without realizing it, her fingertips still resting lightly against his skin as warmth pulsed beneath them, no longer chaotic, no longer overwhelming, but steady, controlled, as if something inside him had chosen, just for a moment, to be still, and that choice mattered more than anything else, because it meant he was not lost, not completely. And her heart beat faster at the realization, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous, something like hope, fragile and persistent, and she swallowed softly as she allowed her hand to remain where it was, not pulling away, not rushing forward, simply existing in that quiet connection, letting him decide whether to accept it or reject it. And for several long seconds, nothing broke that stillness, no sudden movement, no resistance. Just the low, steady rhythm of something alive beneath her palm, and she exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing as she spoke again, her voice softer now, almost gentle enough to disappear into the silence. "You are not alone anymore," she said, the words simple but carrying more weight than she expected, because she felt it as she said it, that faint pull again, stronger this time, as if something deep within him was responding, not fully, not clearly, but enough to reach back, and it sent a quiet shiver through her, not of fear, but of recognition, as though their presence in this moment was not an accident, not random, but something that had been waiting to happen long before she ever stepped into this tower. And her fingers moved slightly, not gripping, not holding, just a small shift to reassure, to ground, to remind him that she was still there, that she was not going to disappear the moment he allowed himself to feel. And she saw it then, the smallest change in his gaze, subtle but unmistakable, the intensity softening just a fraction, the darkness in his eyes no longer consuming everything. And for a brief second, she caught a glimpse of something else beneath it, something human, something aware, something that recognized her presence not as a threat, but as something different, something unfamiliar but not unwelcome. And her breath caught as that fleeting moment passed, the shadow returning, but not as strong as before, not as absolute. And it gave her the courage to stay where she was, to lean just slightly closer, her voice barely above a whisper now. "I know it hurts," she murmured, not asking, not assuming, simply stating what she felt echoing through her chest. And the response was immediate, not in movement, not in sound, but in that same invisible current that ran between them, stronger now, heavier, filled with exhaustion and something that felt like resistance, like a part of him fighting to stay present despite whatever was trying to pull him under again. And Elena closed her eyes briefly, letting that sensation pass through her, grounding herself before opening them again, her gaze steady, unwavering, and she did not pull away, even as the warmth intensified for a moment, even as the tension threatened to rise again. because she understood now that this was not a straight path, not a simple change, but something fragile that could break if she stepped back too soon. And so she remained, her hand steady, her presence calm, her voice quiet but certain. "Then stay with me," she said softly, not commanding, not pleading, just offering, and the air around them stilled once more, the tension easing again in response, slower this time, deeper, as if whatever part of him had been listening was beginning to trust the sound of her voice, the feeling of her touch, the quiet promise that she was not leaving. And for the first time since she had entered the tower, Elena realized she was no longer waiting for something to happen. She was part of it, part of whatever was beginning to change. The warmth between them did not fade. It deepened, settling into something steady and alive. And Elena felt it travel through her fingertips and into her chest, as if the connection was no longer one way. As if something within him had begun to respond not just instinctively, but intentionally. And the realization made her breath catch, her pulse quickening with a quiet intensity that had nothing to do with fear. Because this was different now, no longer just her reaching out into the darkness, but the darkness shifting, listening, answering in its own silent way. And she held on to that fragile change with everything she had, her hand remaining against him, her presence unwavering, because she could feel it, that pull again, stronger now, like a current moving beneath the surface, not chaotic, not violent, but searching, reaching, and it wrapped around her senses in a way she could not ignore, carrying fragments of something deeper, something buried beneath layers of silence and restraint. And she closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel it fully, not resisting, not pulling away, just allowing that quiet connection to guide her, and images brushed against her awareness. Not clear, not whole, but enough to understand, glimpses of strength, of solitude, of a man who had once stood unshaken before the world, and now remained trapped within himself, and her chest tightened at the weight of it, because it was not anger she felt from him, not truly, but exhaustion, the kind that came from holding on for too long without relief. And when she opened her eyes again, her gaze softened, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You have been fighting this alone," she said gently, not as a question, but as truth. And the response came not in movement, but in that same invisible thread between them, tightening for a brief moment before settling again, as if something inside him had acknowledged her words even if he could not speak them, and it gave her the courage to move closer still, the distance between them now almost non-existent, her breath mingling with the warmth surrounding him. And she could feel the tension shifting again, not rising, not resisting, but wavering, uncertain, as though something within him was beginning to question the boundaries it had been forced to accept. And her fingers traced lightly against his skin, not exploring, not demanding, just reassuring, grounding, reminding him that he was not alone in this moment. And the air responded, subtle but undeniable, the weight of the curse, pressing less heavily, if only for a second, and Elena felt it like a breath of fresh air in a place that had long forgotten what that meant, and her heart lifted with it, fragile hope taking root where fear had once been, and she leaned in slightly, not out of impulse but out of certainty, her voice steady despite the intensity building between them. "You can come back," she murmured softly, the words carrying no command, only belief. And for a moment, everything stilled again, the tower, the air, the quiet hum beneath the surface, as if the world itself was waiting to see whether that belief would be answered. And then she felt it, unmistakable this time, a shift deeper than before, not just awareness but intention, something within him reaching toward her in return, faint but real, and it sent a quiet surge through her, not overwhelming, not frightening, but undeniable, and she did not pull away, did not break the connection, because she understood now that this was the turning point, not a sudden change, not a dramatic release, but the beginning of something fragile and powerful at the same time, something that required patience, trust, and the courage to stay even when nothing was certain. And Elena chose to stay, her hand steady, her presence unwavering, her voice soft but resolute as she whispered, "Stay with me just a little longer." And this time, the silence that followed did not feel empty, it felt full, as if something within the darkness had heard her and, for the first time, was considering the possibility of answering. The connection did not break. It tightened, deepening into something that felt less like chance and more like inevitability, and Elena could feel it now with startling clarity. Not just the echo of his pain, but the shape of it, the edges of something that had been sealed away for too long, something that resisted and reached at the same time. And it made her breath slow as her fingers remained steady against him, her presence the only constant in a space that had known nothing but isolation. And for a moment she wondered if this was what it meant to truly see someone, not with eyes but with something deeper, something that recognized the truth beneath the surface. And she did not pull away, even as the warmth shifted again, rising slightly, not in threat but in response, as if something within him was testing the boundary of this fragile connection, uncertain but no longer entirely lost. And she felt it brush against her awareness, tentative, searching, like a voice that had forgotten how to speak but still remembered how to listen. And it sent a quiet tremor through her chest, not fear, but something close to awe, because this was no longer one-sided. He was there, reaching back in his own way, and the realization steadied her more than anything else could have. Her voice soft but certain as she spoke again. "You are stronger than this," she murmured, not as encouragement but as truth, because she could feel it, that strength beneath everything else, buried but unbroken. And the response came slowly this time, not immediate, not sharp, but unfolding, the tension beneath her touch shifting, reorganizing, as if something inside him was listening not just to her voice but to the meaning behind it. And for a brief moment, the weight pressing against her chest lifted, replaced by something lighter, something clearer, and she inhaled sharply as the sensation passed through her, her eyes lifting to meet his again, searching, steady, and she saw it there, not fully, not yet, but unmistakable, awareness, flickering behind the shadow, fragile but real, and it changed everything, because now she was not speaking into silence, she was speaking to him, and that truth gave her the courage to move even closer, her other hand rising slowly, carefully, until both of her hands rested against him, not holding, not restraining, just anchoring, offering stability in a world that had been anything but. And the moment that second point of contact settled, the shift came stronger than before, a wave of something she could not fully name moving between them, not overwhelming, not painful, but undeniable, like two separate currents finding a way to align. And Elena felt it pull at her, not forcefully, but persistently, as if something within him recognized her presence in a way neither of them could explain. And her breath caught as the warmth surged once more, not chaotic this time, but focused, directed, and it wrapped around her senses in a way that felt almost like a question, and she did not resist it, did not pull back, because she understood now that this was the moment where trust mattered most, and she let herself answer in the only way she knew how, by staying, by not turning away, by allowing that quiet strength within her to remain steady despite the unknown. And her voice softened even further, barely audible but filled with certainty. "You are still you," she whispered, the words simple but grounded in everything she felt in that moment. And for a heartbeat, everything stilled, the air, the warmth, the quiet hum beneath the surface, as if the world itself had paused. And then it happened, subtle but undeniable, the faintest shift in his posture, not restrained, not forced, but chosen, as if something inside him had just taken its first real step forward. And Elena felt it, like a spark catching in the dark, small but powerful, and she held on to it, her hands steady, her presence unwavering, because she knew without doubt now that this was no longer about surviving the tower, it was about bringing him back from it. The spark did not fade. It grew, fragile but undeniable, and Elena felt it the instant it took hold, a subtle shift that moved through him and into her like a quiet breath finally released after being held for far too long. And her own breath caught in response, her fingers tightening just slightly against him without thinking, not to hold him in place, but to anchor herself in the reality of what she was feeling. Because this was no longer imagined, no longer uncertain. It was real, and it was happening now. And she could feel the difference in him, the way the tension no longer coiled as tightly beneath her touch, the way the warmth steadied instead of surging unpredictably, and most of all, the way that presence within him no longer felt distant or unreachable, but closer, clearer, as if something had shifted just enough to let him step forward instead of being dragged back. And her heart pounded with a quiet urgency, not fear, but the awareness that this moment mattered more than any before it. That whatever she did next could either strengthen what was forming between them or cause it to slip away. And she did not allow herself to hesitate, her hands remaining steady, her voice soft but filled with quiet conviction as she spoke again. "You are here with me," she said, each word deliberate, grounding, meant to give shape to what she felt rather than force it into existence. And the response came in a way that made her breath falter, not through movement, not through sound, but through that invisible connection that had grown between them. A clear, unmistakable pull that reached toward her with intent, not confusion, not instinct, but awareness. And it sent a quiet tremor through her chest, her pulse racing as she met his gaze fully, unflinching. And this time, she saw it, not just a flicker, not just a hint, but something stronger, something that held, even if only for a second longer than before, and it changed everything, because now there was no doubt left. He was there, fighting, choosing, holding on in a way that defied everything the world had believed about him. And she felt it echo inside her, that same determination rising to meet his, steadying her, grounding her, pushing her forward without fear. And she took a small step closer, closing the last remaining space between them, her hands still against him, her presence unwavering. Her voice softer now, but carrying more weight than before. "You do not have to fight it alone anymore," she whispered, and the words settled into the space between them like a promise. And for a moment, everything stilled again, but this time it did not feel uncertain. It felt full, charged with something waiting to break through. And then she felt it, a deeper shift, something within him pushing forward against whatever held it back. Not violently, not suddenly, but with quiet persistence, as if he was choosing, one step at a time, to come back. And the warmth around them changed again, no longer just steady but responsive, aligning with her presence instead of resisting it. And it wrapped around her senses in a way that felt almost like recognition, like something within him knew her, not from memory but from something deeper, something that did not require time or explanation. And her breath softened as she felt it, her eyes never leaving his, her hands steady as she let that connection hold, not forcing it, not rushing it, just allowing it to exist, because she understood now that this was not about breaking the curse in a single moment. It was about giving him the space to find his way back through it. And as she stood there, grounded and unwavering, she realized something else, something that settled into her chest with quiet certainty, that this connection between them was not fragile anymore. It was growing stronger with every second they remained like this. And for the first time since she entered the tower, Elena did not feel like she was standing before a curse. She felt like she was standing with him, and that changed everything. The connection surged without warning, not violently, but with a depth that stole the air from her lungs, and Elena felt it before she could understand it. A powerful shift moving through him and into her like a tide that had finally decided to rise, steady but unstoppable, and her breath caught as her hands remained against him, no longer just grounding, but part of something larger now, something alive between them. And she could feel it clearly, that presence within him no longer distant or flickering, but pushing forward with intent, breaking through layer by layer. And her heart raced as she met his gaze, unflinching, because this time there was no mistaking it. The darkness had not disappeared, but it had parted, just enough for something real to come through, something aware, something that saw her, not as a threat, not as a stranger, but as something familiar in a way that made no sense and yet felt undeniable. And the realization sent a quiet tremor through her chest, her pulse quickening as the air around them seemed to shift with it, the warmth intensifying but not in a way that overwhelmed. Instead it aligned, steady and focused, as if it was no longer reacting blindly but responding directly to her presence, to her voice, to her touch. And she did not pull away, did not break the connection, because she understood now that this was the moment everything had been building toward, not a sudden release, not a dramatic end, but a crossing point where something hidden finally chose to step into the light. And her voice softened, barely more than a breath, yet filled with certainty as she spoke. "I know you can hear me," she said gently, her words carrying through the space between them with quiet clarity. And for a heartbeat, everything stilled again, the tower, the air, the invisible thread binding them, as if the world itself was waiting for his answer. And then it came, not in words, not yet, but in something just as powerful, a shift in his gaze, subtle but undeniable. The intensity no longer distant or shadowed, but focused, present, and fixed entirely on her. And it changed everything. Because in that moment, she was no longer reaching into darkness. She was standing face to face with him, and her breath caught as she felt it, that connection. Tightening once more, deeper now, stronger, carrying something new within it. Not just awareness, not just recognition, but something warmer, something that settled into her chest with a quiet certainty that made her pulse race for an entirely different reason. And she did not question it, did not try to name it. She simply let it exist, her hands steady, her presence unwavering, because she knew that whatever this was, it was fragile in its own way, and it needed space to unfold. And slowly, carefully, she moved just a fraction closer, closing the last trace of distance that remained, her voice softer now, almost reverent. "You are coming back," she whispered, and this time, the response did not stay hidden beneath the surface. It moved through him with unmistakable clarity, a quiet but deliberate shift that carried into the space between them, and she felt it as surely as if he had spoken, a silent answer, a presence stepping forward fully for the first time, and her breath trembled as she held his gaze, her heart pounding, because she knew, without doubt, that the line had been crossed, that whatever had been holding him back was beginning to loosen its grip, and she was standing at the center of it, not as an observer, but as the reason it was happening. And the realization settled into her chest with a quiet intensity, because this was no longer just about breaking a curse. It was about something deeper, something that had chosen her just as she had chosen to stay. And for the first time since she entered the tower, Elena felt the truth of it fully, that he was not just returning, he was returning to her. The moment did not explode into chaos or spectacle. It unfolded, slow and undeniable, like something ancient finally remembering how to breathe. And Elena felt it first in the way the warmth shifted, no longer surrounding her from the outside, but meeting her at the center, steady and clear, and her hands remained against him, unmoving, as if any sudden motion might break whatever fragile boundary had just been crossed. But nothing broke, nothing shattered. Instead, the tension that had once filled the tower began to dissolve, not completely, not all at once, but enough for her to feel the difference. Enough for her to know that something irreversible had begun, and her breath trembled as she held his gaze, because this time there was no shadow between them, not fully, not entirely gone, but no longer in control, and what remained was him, present, aware, and looking at her in a way that made the world beyond this moment feel distant and irrelevant. And she swallowed softly, her voice barely more than a whisper as she spoke. "You are still here," she said again. But this time it was not a promise, it was a recognition, and the response came not through the invisible thread they had shared before, but through something far more real, a shift in him, that she could see, that she could feel beneath her hands, as if the weight he had been carrying had finally loosened just enough for him to stand within himself again, and the air around them steadied with it, the warmth settling into something calm, something grounded, something no longer driven by the chaos of the curse, but by something far more human. And her heart pounded as she realized what that meant, that this was not just a moment, not just a flicker, but the beginning of his return. And she felt it in the way the connection between them changed, no longer fragile, no longer uncertain, but anchored, as if whatever had been awakened could not be pushed back into silence again. And it sent a quiet wave through her chest, something that felt like relief and awe all at once. And she did not pull away, did not break the contact, because she understood now that this was where she was meant to be, that this moment had chosen her just as much as she had chosen to stay. And her fingers moved slightly, not to test, not to question, but to reassure, to ground, to confirm that this was real. And when she spoke again, her voice carried a quiet certainty that had not been there before. "You came back," she murmured, and this time, the answer did not stay hidden. It did not remain unspoken. It moved through him with a clarity that left no room for doubt, not in words, not yet, but in presence. In the way he held himself, in the way his gaze remained fixed on hers without drifting, without fading, and it was enough, more than enough, because it told her everything she needed to know, that he was here, that he was aware, that he had chosen to return, and the realization settled into her chest with a quiet strength, because this was not the end of anything. It was the beginning, the moment where everything that had been broken began to shift towards something whole again, and as she stood there with him, her hands steady, her presence unwavering, she understood one final truth, that this connection between them was not something that could be undone, not by distance, not by fear, not even by the remnants of the curse, because it had already taken root, already grown. Beyond something fragile into something real, something that would continue long after this moment passed, and as the silence settled around them once more, it no longer felt empty or uncertain. It felt full, complete, as if the tower itself had changed along with them. And for the first time, Elena did not feel like she had been sent here as a sacrifice.